The baptismal water felt impossibly cold against the baby's forehead, stark against the humid warmth of the crowded church. Incense hung thick and sweet, mingling with a faint, sharp scent of lilies. My niece, swaddled in layers of white lace that felt both fragile and suffocating, let out a startled cry, a tiny, vulnerable sound swallowed almost instantly by the murmur of prayers and polite coughs. I stood slightly apart from the main cluster of family around the font, close enough to see, far enough to feel the familiar, dull ache of distance. My smile felt stiff, painted on for the benefit of distant cousins and the priest, whose kind eyes seemed to see everything and nothing all at once. My mother was beside me, her arm brushing mine. I could feel the tension in her body, a low hum I'd known my entire life. It was a tension that always coiled tighter when I was near, a silent judgment I'd learned to live inside. Her eyes weren't on the baby, not really. They were flicking, scanning the room, cataloging who was here, who wasn't, who was dressed right, who wasn't. Her gaze settled on me for a fraction of a second, cool and assessing. She leaned in then, her breath warm against my ear, a stark contrast to the chill of the water moments before. Her voice was a low whisper, meant only for me, masked by the rustle of silk dresses and the shuffling of feet on polished stone. The words landed not like a whisper at all, but like a small, sharp rock dropped into still water, shattering the surface calm. Maybe, she breathed, the word drawn out, laced with an old, familiar pity that always tasted like poison. Maybe one day, you'll deserve a family. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. That sentence. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really a cruel statement delivered with heat. It was just a fact, presented with the casual, unquestioning certainty of telling someone the sky is blue. Maybe one day you'll deserve a family. As if deservingness was something you earned, something you could fail at. And I, in her eyes, had failed. Spectacularly. My life, before that whisper, felt like a constant, low-grade hum of trying to fit into a space I wasn't designed for. My family was a performance. A stage where everyone played their assigned role, spoke their rehearsed lines, and smiled on cue. My mother was the director, conductor, and lead actress, all in one. My father was a quiet man, present but absent, lost somewhere behind the newspaper or the television screen, his silence a form of neutrality that felt, to me, like complicity. My siblings, older, had found their roles early. One was the golden child, effortlessly successful, marrying well, producing perfect grandchildren. The other was the rebel, the charming ne'er-do-well who required constant, dramatic intervention, which paradoxically made him central to the family narrative in a way I never was. And I was the outlier. The one who didn't quite track. Too quiet sometimes, too opinionated others. My achievements were met with faint praise, my struggles with thinly veiled, I told you so, or, worse, silence. Family gatherings were the primary stage for this performance. Thanksgiving dinners where my mother would orchestrate seating arrangements to place me near the least offensive relatives, away from the important conversations. Christmas mornings where gifts for my siblings were carefully chosen expressions of understanding and affection, while mine felt like afterthoughts, practical, generic, devoid of any personal touch. It was the comments, the small, sharp comments that chipped away at the edges of my self-worth. Still single? Don't you worry, there's someone out there for everyone. Eventually said with a sigh that implied, but probably not for you. Oh, your job sounds interesting. Not quite what we imagined, but interesting, the subtle pause before interesting, loud enough to fill the room. My choices, my personality, my very existence seemed to be a constant source of low-level disappointment. I remember a particular Easter brunch years ago. The conversation had turned, as it often did, to weddings and babies. My older sister was showing off photos of her latest ultrasound. My mother's face was radiant, beaming with genuine, unrestrained joy. She was stroking her daughter's hand, murmuring about legacy, about the future, about the continuation of the family name. It felt like watching a private, tender scene I had accidentally stumbled into, a scene I was not meant to be a part of. When the conversation finally, inevitably, looped back to me, it was my aunt, my mother's sister, who asked, brightly, "And you? Any prospects?" My mother cut in before I could even formulate a polite shrug. "Oh, she's focused on her career, aren't you, dear? Plenty of time for that." The way she said that, it wasn't just about relationships or babies. It was about the messy, unpredictable business of building a life that included deep connection, shared vulnerability, the kind of love that led to the very thing being celebrated around the table. It was dismissed as a lower priority, something I was perhaps incapable of or certainly not ready for, not deserving of. There was a deep, quiet yearning inside me for the simple things my siblings seemed to take for granted. The easy affection, the unquestioning support, the feeling of belonging that didn't depend on performance or achievement. I craved the warmth of a real family, not the cold performance of one. I dreamt of a home filled with laughter that wasn't forced, arguments that were cleared with genuine apologies, and love that was given freely, not earned through some mysterious, ever-shifting criteria. This yearning was a vulnerable spot, a tender bruise I protected fiercely from the casual jabs and dismissive glances. I built walls around it, projected an air of independent competence, a life where I didn't need anything from them. But the desire was always there, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my carefully constructed exterior. The baptism, though, that was different. It was a milestone, a new life entering the world, joining the family. There was a purity to it, a fresh start. And standing there, watching the ancient ritual, the hope flickered, foolishly, stupidly, within me. Maybe, just maybe, witnessing this new beginning, this undeniable expansion of the family circle, would soften something. Maybe it would remind my mother, all of them, of the fundamental human need for connection, for belonging. Maybe it would remind them that I, too, was part of this circle, however tenuously. Maybe, just maybe, she would look at me with something other than that cool assessment, that subtle disappointment. Maybe she would see a daughter, a sister, an aunt, who also longed for that deep-rooted sense of family. But the whisper, that single line, maybe one day, you'll deserve a family. It wasn't about my current relationship status or my job or anything tangible. It was a judgment on my very soul, my fundamental worth. It stripped away any possibility of future hope based on changing circumstances. It positioned family, true, unconditional family, as a reward for some unknown, unreachable standard of behavior or being. And it implied, damningly, that I was currently inherently undeserving. The sound of the church bells ringing felt muffled, distant. The congratulatory chatter swirled around me like a disorienting fog. My mother moved away then, drawn into a conversation with the baby's parents, her face once again arranged in the appropriate expression of maternal pride and familial satisfaction. I stood rooted to the spot, the cold stone floor seeping into my shoes, the scent of lilies suddenly cloying, sickeningly sweet. The words echoed in the hollow space inside my chest where that foolish flicker of hope had just been extinguished. Deserve a family. It felt less like a challenge and more like a curse, a quiet, devastating condemnation delivered in the most inappropriate, sacred setting imaginable. My smile had frozen on my face, a brittle mask over the sudden, sharp pain blooming in my chest. I nodded along to conversations I wasn't hearing, my eyes fixed on the vibrant stained glass windows, seeing not the saints depicted, but the reflection of my own stunned, hurt face. The weight of those 9 words felt heavier than the stone walls of the church itself. They didn't just dismiss my present. They poisoned my future. They didn't just criticize my actions. They condemned my very being. And in that moment, standing amidst the celebration of new life and family bonds, I felt utterly, completely, and irrevocably alone. In the immediate aftermath of the baptism, I did what I always did. I compartmentalized. I shoved the words down, deep inside, pretending they hadn't landed. I perfected the art of appearing unaffected. I made polite conversation at the reception, admired the baby with what I hoped was genuine warmth, and navigated the social minefield of family dynamics with practiced ease. Inside, though, a cold knot had formed. The words replayed constantly, a toxic loop on repeat. Maybe one day you'll deserve a family. It wasn't just the hurt, it was the unfairness, the sheer arbitrariness of the judgment. What had I done or not done to be deemed unworthy of something so fundamental? My early attempts to process this were clumsy, internal battles fought in the privacy of my apartment. I'd try to rationalize her words. Was she worried about me? Was it tough love? Was she just having a bad day? But the delivery, the context, the lifetime of microaggressions that preceded it all pointed to something far more fundamental.
It was a statement of her truth about me.
I tried, briefly, to bridge the gap, to understand. I called her a few days later, ostensibly to thank her for
something.
I steered the conversation gently, trying to find an opening, a way to ask, without directly referencing the baptism, what she meant by everything. The conversation was polite, superficial. She talked about her bridge club, the rising price of groceries, the baby's sleeping schedule. There was no space for vulnerability, no crack in the carefully constructed facade of mundane normality. It was like trying to talk to a brick wall, a beautifully wallpapered brick wall. Every attempt to connect on a deeper level, to discuss feelings or insecurities or the invisible barriers between us, was met with deflection, a change of subject, or a sudden, inexplicable end to the call. It became clear, painfully so, that she wasn't interested in understanding me, or in being understood. The dynamic was fixed. She was the authority, the judge. I was the perennial disappointment. My early struggles were marked by this futile circling, this desperate, ingrained habit of seeking validation from the very source that denied it. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand she explain why she felt I was so fundamentally flawed, so undeserving of basic happiness and connection. But the words wouldn't come. The lifetime of conditioning held me silent, locked in a pattern of seeking approval I knew, deep down, would never be granted. I felt like a lab rat, repeatedly hitting a lever for a reward that never appeared, yet unable to stop trying because the hunger was so primal. The midpoint shift wasn't a single dramatic event, but a slow, tectonic shift within me. It happened over months, perhaps a year, marked by a gradual fading of that desperate hunger for her approval. It was fueled by the constant, low-level reinforcement of her judgment through continued interactions. A family dinner where she subtly undermined my career choices in front of distant relatives. A phone call where she spent 20 minutes extolling the virtues of my sister's parenting style, then abruptly ended the call when I started talking about my own life. Each interaction was a tiny chip, eroding the last remnants of hope. The shift solidified one cold, gray evening. I was alone in my apartment, scrolling through social media, seeing endless pictures of happy families, of milestones celebrated, of casual, easy affection shared without reservation. And I saw a post from my mother, a gushing tribute to my sister and her beautiful, growing family, accompanied by photos from a family picnic I hadn't even been invited to. It wasn't the exclusion itself, that was normal. It was the text, the heartfelt, loving language she used, the pride and warmth that radiated from her words. It was the stark contrast to the cold assessment she reserved for me. In that moment, something inside me broke. Not in a fragile, shattered way, but in a hard, final snap. The string that connected me to that lifelong yearning for her love and approval simply
severed.
It wasn't painful, not exactly. It was more like a sudden, quiet void. The space where hope had lived was suddenly empty. And into that emptiness rushed a strange, cold clarity. I stopped feeling hurt. I stopped feeling rejected. I started feeling observant,
detached.
The constant effort to earn her love, to fit her mold, to prove my worthiness, it suddenly felt absurd. A lifetime spent seeking permission to exist, permission to be happy, permission to build a family. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, She would never give it. Not because I wasn't deserving, but because, for reasons I might never understand, she couldn't see me as deserving. It was a reflection of her, not of me. And with that realization came a different kind of feeling. Not hope, but determination. Cold, quiet, and utterly resolute. I stopped wanting her family. I started wanting my family. A family built on mutual love, respect, and acceptance. A family I would choose and who would choose me. A family where worthiness wasn't a prerequisite, but an inherent truth. The midpoint shift wasn't about fixing the relationship with my mother. It was about finally, completely, emotionally detaching from the need for it. It was about turning my back on the stage and walking off into the wings, ready to build my own world, with its own rules, its own cast of characters, and its own definitions of love and belonging. The ache was still there, a phantom limb where hope used to be, but it was overlaid with a new, steel-like resolve. I would build my own family, and I wouldn't just build it. I would make it undeniable. Building a family, my own family from scratch, outside the predefined lines of my upbringing, was harder than I could have imagined. The determination was there, a steady pilot light, but the path was fraught with rising challenges. First, there was finding the right person. Years of navigating relationships with the subtle poison of my mother's voice in the back of my head had left scars. I was wary, defended. Every potential partner was subconsciously measured against an impossible standard, and every disagreement felt like a confirmation of my own unworthiness, an echo of, maybe you don't deserve this. Dating in my 30s felt like navigating a minefield while blindfolded. Awkward first dates that fizzled, promising connections that dissolved, the crushing weight of repeated disappointment. There were moments I would catch myself thinking, see? She was right. I'm not capable of this. The ghost of her whisper was a constant companion in the quiet moments of doubt and loneliness. Then there was the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, friction with the family as I began to forge my own path. As I dated more seriously, the questions from relatives intensified.
Who is he?
What does he do? Is he suitable? My mother's comments, when they came, were laced with a forced curiosity that barely masked her suspicion. He seems nice enough. For now, or after meeting a wonderful partner, he's very different from what we expected for you. The implication was always clear. My choices were questionable, my judgment suspect. As my relationship deepened, and I started spending holidays with my partner's warm, accepting family, a family where laughter was easy and inclusion was automatic, the contrast became almost unbearable. Calls with my mother became shorter, strained. Invitations to family events became fewer, sometimes arriving late, or with a casual, "Oh, we just assumed you'd be busy." The distance I had initially sought for my own emotional survival was now being reinforced by their passive exclusion. It was a strange paradox. As I built my own life, I was being systematically erased from the old one. This period was marked by a constant, low-level stress. The emotional energy required to maintain my boundaries, to not react to the slights, to simply live my life in defiance of their expectations, was immense. It felt like swimming against a current, constantly exerting effort just to stay in place. I had to actively challenge the ingrained belief that I was somehow fundamentally flawed, that my desires for a normal life, a family, were grandiose or unrealistic. Every step forward felt like a battle fought against years of conditioning and external judgment. Friends became my lifeline, my chosen family. They saw me, validated me, celebrated my small victories in a way my family never had. Their acceptance was a balm, a steady counter-narrative to the one that played on repeat in my head. But the void left by the biological family connection, while no longer aching with desperation, still felt empty sometimes, a quiet reminder of what was missing, what had been deliberately withheld. The rising challenges weren't just external obstacles, they were internal ones, forcing me to constantly reaffirm my own worth in the face of a lifetime of being told I lacked it. The deepening crisis struck, just as things felt like they were stabilizing, just as I dared to believe I might actually achieve the family I craved. My partner and I decided to try for a baby. It felt like the natural next step, the culmination of building a strong, loving relationship. We were ready. Emotionally, financially, we felt prepared to bring a child into our world, a world built on a foundation of mutual respect and deep affection. It should have been a time of pure joy and anticipation. Instead, it became a descent into uncertainty and despair. Month after month passed with no success. The initial optimism gave way to concern, then to anxiety, and finally, to a deep, gnawing fear. Doctor's appointments became a regular part of our lives, filled with tests, procedures, and jargon that felt cold and clinical. The language of fertility treatments was foreign, sterile, utterly devoid of the warmth and magic I associated with bringing a child into the world. Each failed attempt felt like a personal failure, not just a biological one, but a confirmation of that ancient whisper. Maybe one day you'll deserve a family. Was this it? Was this the universe, or fate, or something darker, validating my mother's judgment? Was I fundamentally incapable, not just emotionally, but physically, of creating the family I so desperately wanted? The despair was a physical weight. I would lie awake at night, the silence amplifying the echo of her words. Undeserving. The hope that had felt so solid, built on the foundation of a loving relationship and a fierce determination, began to crumble. Everything felt precarious. My partner was supportive, but I could see the strain on him too. We had built this beautiful life together, dreaming of filling it with the chaos and joy of children, and now that dream felt like it was slipping through our fingers. The fertility clinic became a place of quiet suffering. Women with hopeful smiles, women with etched lines of worry, women with the same vacant, tired eyes I saw in my own reflection. The procedures were invasive, uncomfortable, stripping away dignity layer by layer. The waiting for results, waiting for appointments, waiting for a sign that this painful journey would end in the joy we sought, was the worst part. It was during this time, at my lowest ebb, that the doubt truly took root. Was I fighting against something inevitable? Was my mother's intuition, twisted as it was, somehow correct? Had years of being told I was not enough manifested in a physical inability to create life? The rational part of my brain screamed that this was absurd, that infertility was a medical condition, not a moral failing. But the emotional part, the part that had been wounded so deeply in childhood, was susceptible to the old narratives. It felt like all my efforts, all my defiance, all the strength I had built, was for nothing. The world, or at least my small corner of it, seemed determined to prove her right. All felt lost. The dream of my family felt impossibly distant, perhaps even impossible. The darkness was thick, suffocating. But despair, for me, had always been a temporary state, a precursor to a hardening, a calcification of resolve. When I hit rock bottom, something shifted. The turning point wasn't a moment of renewed hope. It was a moment of cold, quiet fury. I was sitting in the sterile waiting room of the clinic, the air conditioning making my skin prickle, listening to the hushed, hopeful conversations around me. And the thought came, unbidden, sharp and clear. Even if this doesn't work, she will not win. Winning, at this point, wasn't about having a baby. It was about denying her the satisfaction of being right. It was about refusing to let her narrative become my reality. It was about seizing control of my own story, regardless of the outcome of this particular struggle. The coldness that had settled in after the midpoint shift deepened, solidifying into something like ice in my veins. I looked at my reflection in the clinic window, tired, drawn, but with a new, hard glint in my eyes. This wasn't about proving myself worthy to her. It was about proving her irrelevant. My desire for a family wasn't something she had the power to grant or deny. It was mine, and I would pursue it with every ounce of strength I had, not for her approval, but for my own fulfillment, for my partner, for the sheer, stubborn principle of building a life that was mine, unapologetically, beautifully, defiantly. I stopped focusing on the outcome and started focusing on the fight. The setbacks were no longer proof of my unworthiness, but obstacles to be overcome. The emotional pain was no longer a reason to despair, but fuel for the fire of my resolve. The plan solidified in the quiet hours of the night, not a joyful plan, but a strategic one. If I was going to build this family, if I was going to fight this fight, I would do it on my terms. I would share my journey, my eventual triumph, if it came, not within the suffocating confines of my toxic family system, but openly, honestly, with the world. I would find my validation not in their grudging acknowledgement, but in the support and connection of others who understood, who celebrated genuine life and genuine love. The turning point was complete. I was no longer seeking acceptance. I was preparing for a declaration. The two pink lines appeared faint at first, then bold, undeniable. A small, quiet miracle after months of invasive procedures, of chemical smells and sterile rooms, of hope and crushing disappointment cycling with brutal regularity. The feeling wasn't the explosive joy I had always imagined. It was a quiet awe, a fragile disbelief, a profound sense of relief, mixed with the ingrained fear of something going wrong. We kept it a secret, just us, my partner and me, for weeks. This wasn't just caution, it was strategic. This news, this precious, vulnerable life growing inside me, was too important, too sacred, to be subjected to the potentially toxic scrutiny of my biological family. I wanted to hold on to it, protect it, let it grow strong in the warmth of our private joy before exposing it to the world. As the weeks turned into months, and the pregnancy became undeniably real, the subtle changes in my body, the first fluttery movements, the doctor's appointments filled with reassuring heartbeats, a different kind of power began to build within me. It wasn't the power of control over others, but the power of having created something beautiful and true against the odds, against the insidious narrative of my own inadequacy. And the plan for the announcement began to take shape, not just a casual social media post, but something deliberate, something designed to reach beyond my immediate circle, something undeniable. I chose a photo carefully. Not just a generic ultrasound picture, but a picture of us, my partner and me, laughing, holding a tiny pair of baby shoes. It captured the joy, the love, the family we had built together, piece by painful piece. The caption was simple, heartfelt, announcing our news to the world, expressing our excitement for the future. There was no mention of struggle, no plea for validation. It was just pure, unadulterated joy and anticipation. I picked the time of day carefully, knowing when most people, including likely members of my extended family network, would be scrolling. And then, with a deep breath that felt like both exhaling years of held tension and inhaling a terrifying future, I hit post. The immediate aftermath was a blur of notifications. My phone buzzed almost constantly. Likes, comments, shares poured in from friends, from colleagues, from people I hadn't spoken to in years. The outpouring of love and congratulation was overwhelming, a wave of positive energy that felt like a cleansing tide washing away the years of doubt and negativity. People I barely knew were sharing their own stories, offering advice, expressing genuine happiness for us. The validation I had once craved from a single source was now flowing in from hundreds, thousands of people, a testament to the universal appeal of new life, of hope, of love. It was intoxicating. And then came the quiet, anticipated part, the waiting for the ripple effect to reach the edges of my biological family's world. I hadn't sent them a personal announcement. I hadn't called. This wasn't about extending an olive branch or seeking reconciliation. This was about a quiet, undeniable declaration of victory, delivered indirectly, publicly, beyond their control. I heard about my mother's reaction not directly, but through the family grapevine. My aunt, the same one who had asked about my prospects years ago, called, her voice tight with a mixture of feigned enthusiasm and barely concealed shock. "Oh, we saw your news. On Facebook."
How?
Wonderful, the pause before wonderful, the slight stammer, said everything. Later, a cousin messaged me, ostensibly to congratulate me, but ended up describing how my mother had seen the post. She hadn't seen it directly on her own feed, but someone had shown her a screenshot, probably wanting to gauge her reaction, or perhaps just unable to contain the gossip. The description was vivid. My mother, at a tea party, looking at the screen, her teacup frozen halfway to her lips. Her face, usually so carefully composed, described as going utterly blank, then white. She reportedly didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared at the image, the picture of her daughter, the undeserving one, radiant with impending motherhood, flanked by a loving partner, her joy amplified by the hundreds of digital affirmations surrounding the post. The cousins said she looked utterly blindsided. Not angry, not sad, but completely, utterly shocked. The world she had so carefully constructed, the narrative she had so confidently controlled, that her daughter was less than, was incapable of, was undeserving of the most fundamental human connection, had just been publicly, spectacularly, irrevocably dismantled. The viral nature of the announcement, the sheer volume of positive affirmation from everyone else, had amplified the message beyond anything she could counter or dismiss. It wasn't just a private achievement. It was a public declaration of a life built despite her, thriving without her validation, receiving the very warmth and acceptance she had withheld. She hadn't just been proven wrong, she had been made irrelevant to the equation of my happiness. Her carefully aimed whisper at the baptism had been answered not with words, but with a life, a future, made visible and celebrated by the world. And in that moment, seeing the confirmation of her shock through the hushed, gossipy reports, I felt a cold, sharp wave of satisfaction. It wasn't triumph and joy. It was something harder, more potent. It was vindication. The betrayer, who had tried to poison my future with a whisper, was blindsided by the undeniable reality of my thriving present, a present I had built from the ground up, stronger and brighter than anything she could have imagined or contained. The aftermath wasn't a storybook ending where my mother suddenly saw the light and we became a perfect, loving family. Life isn't that neat. Her reaction remained complex. There were awkward phone calls, forced congratulations delivered with a strange cheerfulness that was painful to witness. She tried, sometimes clumsily, to insert herself into the narrative, asking about the baby's gender with an almost aggressive casualness, offering unsolicited advice that felt more like criticism disguised as concern. Some family members shifted allegiance, reaching out tentatively, genuinely curious and congratulatory. Others remained firmly in my mother's orbit, their interactions with me becoming even more stilted, burdened by the unspoken tension. My emotional state was a complex tapestry. There was profound joy, of course, the deep, soul-altering love for the tiny human growing inside me, the shared wonder with my partner as we prepared for parenthood. This new love was so pure, so unconditional, that it highlighted the transactional, conditional nature of the love I had received from my mother. There was satisfaction, yes, a deep-seated sense of vindication that settled into a quiet confidence. Her words no longer had power over me. I had built my own world, defined my own worth, created my own family, and it was undeniably real, undeniably beautiful. But there was also a lingering sadness. The victory wasn't sweet in the way I might have once imagined. Proving her wrong didn't magically heal the old wounds. The absence of easy, unconditional familial love was still an absence, a quiet space in my life that this victory couldn't fill. I had achieved my dream, not because of my family, but largely despite them. And that was a bittersweet reality. The lesson learned was etched into my bones. Validation comes from within, and true family is built on connection, not obligation or blood relation. My chosen family, my partner, and our future child, they were my true north. The old family dynamic became less a source of pain and more a distant, cautionary tale. Holding my newborn baby for the first time, feeling that tiny weight in my arms, looking into those innocent eyes, felt like the true resolution. This was it. My family, built with love, resilience, and a fierce determination to defy the narrative I had been handed. The world outside, the opinions, the old judgments, they faded into background noise. In the quiet reality of holding this perfect, deserving child, I knew I had finally, irrevocably, created the family I deserved. And in doing so, I had finally, truly set myself free. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version in the comments below. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.